welcome to Justice Outside the Box podcast. Today we have a guest, Bryce Kander, who's a realtor in Alberta for 13 years and has bought, sold, merged, managed, flipped, jumped, trapped, pretty much everything you can think of for short-term rentals. Reminds me of Bubba Gump Shrimp from Forrest Gump. He has been a leading realtor with realty executives for countless years and is an expert on short-term rentals.
My mom's a genius. Honestly, she taught me everything. But thank you for having me. And I appreciate it. So Matthew actually taught me about commercial real estate. Like, going through the realtor education, you learn about stuff. You just basically learn how to not get sued. But Matthew took me through a course and taught me more about commercial real estate than, honestly, I learned through the real estate education.
I appreciate that. So today we're focusing on short-term rentals and connected to that, I think the first thing is I get a lot of confusion from clients on the difference between a secondary suite and a short-term rental. Mm-hmm. As a realtor, how do you play into that?
Well, I educate them that any property can actually be a short-term rental. So you can legally rent out an illegal basement suite, legally on Airbnb. So let me say that again. You can legally rent out an illegal basement suite, legally on Airbnb, because you can legally rent out part of your house. So I was in the process of legalizing my basement suite, and I was in the process of helping someone buy just a house that has a single car attached garage that they were going to convert into an Airbnb. They're not going to legalize it, so I asked the city inspector, hey, it seems like your bylaws aren't strict enough to restrict someone from renting out an illegal basement suite on Airbnb. She's like, yep, you're correct. So
legally, when we talk about that, a secondary suite basically has to pass a mostly municipal building inspection that says you're compliant with certain categories. So you have the window egress in the basement allows someone to exit in case of a fire, or it has separate fire alarms in the basement in case there's a fire in the basement. It has to have a separate access to the basement. And again, we're talking about secondary suites in a basement. Whereas again, for Airbnb, you can rent out a room. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to have compliance with all of that.
Right.
which makes it much more flexible for people looking for short-term rentals.
Yeah.
To do that. One of the biggest benefits of a secondary suite, though, would probably be it could just be more secure because essentially it's built as a complete separate unit.
Yeah, they can't take it away from you. They could change the bylaws and restrict you from doing that quite easily.
Yeah. But municipalities tend to grandfather those sort of things in, though.
Well, yeah, but they could still take it away. But if it's legal, then it's legal.
If it's legal, then yeah. And that's what's been happening. And one of the reasons for this conversation is Calgary just passed a variety of short-term rental bylaws.
Oh.
That just changed, and they come into effect January 1st, 2024.
That's cool. So
just coming up. And some of the things that they've done is they've required fire inspections for any short-term rentals that have more than 4 to 5 rooms.
So living room, bedroom?
Doma style, so more than 4 or 5, however there's in the basement, but 4 or 5 rooms that people are going to be staying in.
Okay.
So when they were trying to do that, part of their thing was, well, let's just attach that fire inspection part to the short-term rental. And what they've also done, which is kind of different for Calgary, is they've split up the application fees and the licensing fees based off how many people can live in a residence at a time. So they've made it more expensive for more people that can stay there.
Money grab?
Yeah, so money grab. And they've also paid restrictions on things like, for example, and again, I just found this fascinating because I see them doing more of this and I can see other places following.
Yep, we usually follow Calgary and Edmonton.
Right, and so they've said no overlapping, right? They've put in a bylaw that says hosts can't overlap for short-term, as in they can't say, oh, hey, we're going to book you for 2 weeks and then book someone in a day early. Just in case this person leaves earlier, this person leaves, to try and maximize that return.
Like they do on the airplanes.
Yes, exactly. What they do on the airplanes. No one says anything about airplanes. They still let them do that for years. But no, basically in the bylaw says you can't do that.
Didn't know that was an option.
Yeah, right? So, so obviously someone somewhere has been doing it, but it's much more strict than everyone else. Most other places here's your application, here's your fee, you're done.
Like Sylvan Lake.
Sylvan Lake.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other things, when I think about short-term rentals and how they're sort of is what actually is short-term.
Right. Yeah. So is it 28 days? Is it 1 day? Is it 30 days?
And I see again, all over the place, which means that again, so between Red Deer and Sylvan Lake, we're talking like a 15-kilometer difference. You know, you can have a difference between 28 and 30 days.
Yep.
And so one is not a short-term rental. You don't have to do the application for it. You don't have to do anything for it outside of, you know, just a standard, it'd be a standard tenancy, and the one isn't. So,
Yeah. So I got a question. If someone is selling a property, whose responsibility is it to determine the bylaws? Is it the realtor's responsibility? Is it the lawyer's responsibility? Or is it the buyer's responsibility to figure out, hey, can I actually Airbnb this?
so one, I think, would always depend on who the point of contact is from any of those individuals. So if you have a buyer, and the buyer talks to the realtor and they say, hi, realtor, I'd like to buy a property specifically for doing this purpose.
Okay.
And the realtor says yes. And the realtor shows them a property. Then there's kind of a representation by the realtor that property is going to be in compliance.
Right.
Right? But typically, most standard realtor contracts, the real estate contracts put out by the Real Estate Council of Alberta, say the buyer's responsible for their own due diligence. And so it's going to be up to them. And again, as a lawyer, it's going to be the same thing. If a client comes up to me and says, hey, I just want to make sure within this purchase agreement that you're drafting for me, knowing that the realtors draft all the purchase agreements anyway, that is,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be afterwards, but
We don't
you know,
fill in the blanks.
yeah, but if they fill in all the blanks and it has to say like, is Airbnb compliant? Which makes me wonder, could you not add that as a condition?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So even on an offer, say, condition, Airbnb compliant.
Yeah, we had one, it was legally suited in Sylvan Lake, and so we're wondering, okay, so on the performance sheet, if I rent out the upstairs and the basement, it's just $2,000 a month cash flow. Is it legal? Can I get a STAR license, the short-term something license for Sylvan Lake? We didn't know, so we put it in as a condition for the buyer to do their due diligence, call the city, find out, just give them a week to do that, because you can do it in a day. And we found out that in Sylvan Lake, you can't rent out 2 units on the same property.
Yeah.
For suited. I don't know about fourplexes.
Yeah.
I have to figure that out.
Well, you know what, and that's really interesting because you mentioned that, but like in Canmore, it's zoned. So in Canmore, you can't put a short-term rental in specific residential communities. You can only put them into mixed use, how the council zoned it.
I guess they need to keep their employees in.
So what, and the reason for doing that is exactly that. They don't want all these investment properties buying up the entire residential area. And so where do the people that actually work there actually live? Right? You know, Banff is much easier because in Banff, you have to live and work in order to have property.
Crazy.
So you can't have an Airbnb in Banff because it's within the national park itself.
Cool.
And you have to live and work in the national park to have property there.
Huh, I didn't know that.
So there are some restrictions, right, in some places. But yeah, for some and so again, in buying one, if you want to buy one as an investment property, obviously the first step you have to look at is what are the municipal regulations.
Right. So even like condos in Sylvan Lake, there was one building right on Sylvan Lake, and my friend was on the board for short-term rentals, and he's like, "Hey, condos are going to be available to short-term rental. Currently, the city didn't allow for it, and so now you can get your STAR license for a condo." So that building jumped $100,000 in value in a day. some too. There was 3 listed in there for $156,000, $160,000, $165,000. I bought one of them, and I bought it sight unseen because I knew the laws changed. And I've got a rule that if I find a deal, I have to show it to people that are interested, that are loyal to me, before I can buy it myself, because you don't want a realtor buying up all the good deals. I talked to 2 people that I knew that were interested in something like this. One was my friend who just finished renovating one in that building, and he was listing it for $250,000 the day I was writing my offer on the 150 one. And he's like, "No, I want to see how this one goes first." I'm like, "Okay." So I talked to another person, and yeah, so my wife and I, we bought it, and never saw it, and I resold it without ever seeing it and made a profit.
But that does bring up something else. is that homeowners associations and condominium boards are going to be able to restrict Airbnbs within that corporation.
So how can they do that? Because I thought there's an act that you can't stop anyone from living in your property.
Well, it's the same thing though that they can say. They can restrict pets, right? They can restrict smoking in common areas.
Okay.
They can restrict. So they still have the ability to create a bylaw, right? And it's still voted on just like any other corporation based off of unit factor. So when we talk about condominium corporations, they're typically the voting is based off unit factors, and the size of the condominiums gets this amount of unit factor, and it's equivalent to like shares when you talk about corporations, that people would traditionally think about. But when you look at that, they can basically say, here's our bylaws, and this is how we're going to do it. So the same things that they can say within a condominium association, they can say only people who are related to the owners can live there.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. Only people, which is a way of restricting. That's common. It's been, I've had to do condo reviews where you're like, hi, you bought this in Edmonton to go to the University of Alberta, and oh, your friend who's also going there can't stay there without a written exemption because the condominium bylaws don't allow it.
So I thought they were going to change like age restrictions. Is that along
So there is one for age restrictions. It's from 2018, and basically can't remember the name of it. An elder group basically took the government of Alberta to court on age restrictions in condominiums, and in response to that, just all property, and in response to that, they grandfathered it to 2030. Okay, so in 2030, what's going to happen is that your property cannot be 18 and over.
Okay.
It can only be 55 and over. And it's either everyone's 55 and over, or that's it. So what that opens up is a lot of properties are going to be mixed family. So you'll have kids that are going to be able to live there where they were previously restricted. And that's going to be the biggest change.
Okay.
And the reason for that is obviously there's additional services for 55 plus, like care, nursing,
Pools, bowling.
Bingo, whatever. That some people are gonna want, and so the government recognizes that there is a need for that, and so and for that particular group. But essentially, no, it's shaved 55 and above or nothing is going to be the new restriction. But in another 7 years.
Okay, let's go.
So that's going to be a change, and we'll see. And again, and that gives everyone condominiums, everyone to plan around that.
I had some friends that got kicked out of their rental because they had a kid.
And and so again, that would never happen in 2030.
That's awesome.
So I think you've ran Airbnbs before. One of the things that kind of always pops to mind is what's the cost associated with running an Airbnb itself?
To set up a 2-bedroom Airbnb properly costs about $12,000, based on my experience between cutlery and sheets, and then all your furniture, obviously. But you can't just posh it and put it together anymore. It's got to be staged and looking nice, having a theme, like the blue sapphire, the marigold ones that we've set up, where they have a theme, because before anyone and their mom could just throw their place up on, and you'd make $2,000 a month. So that if you want to hire a property management company, I know of 2 in town that are 25% and 30% for management fee, because it's not your property management where it's you put a guy in there and then every once in a while you gotta change a toilet. It's every single couple days you have calls, and depending what time zone they're coming from, you have to respond at 2, 3 a.m. So it's like a white glove service. And on Airbnb, you're making double, triple, or quadruple what long-term rent is. So you can afford to pay that premium white glove service, and you're still making double what you were with long-term rent. My 0-bedroom basement suite was making $795 a month as long-term rent. We spent $10,000 on renovations, another $10,000 on decor, because it's a 0-bedroom basement suite. And it now rents for $1,800 consistently for the last 12 months on Airbnb. It's more than double what $795 was.
So one of the things I always look at is for Airbnbs, I've never owned one, but I've been to several of them, is the 5-star reviews, right? And so I think like anything, you just start out and all of a sudden you get really negative reviews, you lose your steam.
Yeah.
And so part of what you're saying as far as setting up and staging it right from the very beginning, I think helps generate that long-term revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's hard to maintain your superhost status because people are like, oh yeah, it was great, but I'm going to give it a 4-star review because it just didn't have something that I wanted there. But a 5-star review is it as advertised, not is it a 5-star.
Yeah.
And so I was in a place and they had a binder and it said that. I'm like, that's really good. Or my mom said it. I'm not sure.
So, in any of your Airbnbs, have you ever had a dispute?
Well, I had 2 guests stay in my place back to back, and in between those 2 guests, my counter now has a crack in it. So one of them did it. My cleaner didn't inform me when it happened. I went in there after and saw this crack. I'm like, oh, how'd you miss this? So I can't pinpoint who it was, so that's unfortunate. But yeah, there's been other times where it's like this goes missing and then you have your air coverage. So air coverage covers theft, destruction, anything like that, but you need a separate insurance for flooding.
And so, in kind of dealing with a dispute, a lot of times do you build it into your cost of investing? As in, just like when you have a long-term rental, you might have a maintenance sort of budget that you set aside a certain amount every month to cover things like the furnace breaking. Do you do that same thing for just replacement of stuff?
Well, you should have a budget for replacing things like that. Most people don't. Yeah, you need insurance. Like, don't start a business without insurance thinking, oh, I'm not making money right now, I can't afford to do it. That's retarded. It was $100 extra to get the right insurance because I've got the legal suite. So I've got like long-term rent up here and then 365-day Airbnb in the basement. And there was only one insurance company that would insure something like that because it's new. And my basement flooded. And so I have loss of rent insurance. And it's been sitting empty for almost 5 months now, but I get loss of rent insurance. So that $100 a month, I've basically gotten 10 years worth of insurance premium from one incident.
Which is why people get insurance in the first place. I know when I look at some of the issues from a legal perspective, there is air coverage, which is included within your actual Airbnb host contract and built into the price. But when there's a dispute like that, say someone double books you, right? And as you're a guest going to the host and they've double booked you. You just got off the plane to get there. Oh, someone else is already in there.
That's crazy.
What should you do?
And greet them. Huh? Greet the people that are in the house that you just walked into. I don't know. You would call Airbnb, and they would probably never get superhost status ever again. They would probably make them take their Airbnb service down too. So it's always better to be in the.
So there's big consequences for someone, because that obviously what we just mentioned earlier, the city of Calgary, where they said, hi, we're going to actually specifically put this in a bylaw.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah. The other common thing I hear from people, and again, I get as a lawyer, I get questions about all sorts of stuff, is what do I do about noise complaints? And there seems to be this fictitious myth, and I would say it's a myth, that outside of very specific tourist communities focusing on
Coachella.
Yeah. Alcohol consumption, weekend getaways, and bachelor parties or things like that most Airbnbs and most communities aren't, or short-term rentals generally, aren't about partying.
Yeah. They're workers, travel nurses, professionals, or visiting family. That's what's been, I've had Teslas parked out in front of my 0-bedroom basement suite, Porsches, you get, I wish all my renters who are driving Porsches and Teslas. My uncle has one in Palm Springs, Coachella, and they have a noise sensor set to a certain decibel, and so if it goes off, they get a notification on their phone. They also have that doorbell camera so they can see when people are coming out. You can't have cameras in your place, that's just creepy, don't do that. But you can have a camera on the outside of your property that goes to your phone. So then you can see when people are coming in and out, and then it's like, oh, okay, it's 3 a.m. and my doorbell camera is going off. You call Airbnb, well, you call the guest first, and then just check to see. It's like, hey, your reservation said there was 3 people staying here, but the door's open 17 times at 3 a.m. Is everything okay? Don't accuse them right away.
Yeah.
And so they had a party in there, so they called Airbnb. Airbnb calls them, and they kicked them out within 24 hours. It was sooner than 24 hours. Like, I don't know how they kicked them out because it's just a guy calling them, but they kicked them out.
I mean, yeah. So I mean, and those are part of the solutions, right? Like I think as a host, one of the things that I've seen in my travels is just like a clear direction on the actual advertisement about what you can or can't do there. So they'll say like no smoking properties, no pet properties, like, but just restrictions, things like close to this or, close to bus access, parking included, stuff like that. But also I've also seen like policy books. Do you have any of those like that just say, here's where different restaurants are and here's where you can access this and here's emergency phone numbers?
Yeah, you can do the online guide as well. So you create it one time and then you just have it forever that everyone can access. But yeah, our basement flooded after my son was born. And we had to go stay in an Airbnb here in Red Deer. And they had a little binder, and they actually had handwritten reviews. But so typically, I recommend not renting to people that live in the same city as you, because why are they renting a house if they live in there? We rented to someone that was from Red Deer. They had a legitimate reason. Yeah, it was hard getting her out. So the cleaner went in there, and she wasn't packed. She was intoxicated. And yeah, so don't rent to people that live in the same city as you.
Well, they don't have anywhere to go next, right? At least if they're coming in, that they're planning on leaving. No, that's interesting as well. The other part too, when I look at the law and how that might change is, City of Toronto provides an 8% tax in addition to the fees that you would pay. So as a guest, you pay around 6% of fees.
I'm not sure I make them pay it.
Oh, they make that pay? Right, because that's all done and it's shown in the bill, but it's like 14% for, I think it's the other way, sorry. I think 6% for the host and like 14% for the guests that Airbnb takes for doing their connectivity program and all their software and advertising and everything else that they do.
Worth it.
Right? But then in addition to that, like there's cities, municipalities are trying to generate revenue from these short-term rentals as well. So I know the City of Toronto put on an 8% tax on all rentals, so that's an addition to.
We have the 4%. I think 4%?
For the tourism levy?
Yes.
Okay, so then we have the 4% tax.
Yeah.
I know, again, when you go to places like Las Vegas, it's even higher, right? You can get 15-20% based off of a per night visit, the same way you have hotels can be transferred on.
And there's probably not a button that passes it on to the guest, so you have to...
No. It does get passed on to the guests because the requirement under both like a Vrbo platform or an Airbnb platform is that you have to provide clear as to who's paying for what.
Oh, okay.
Right? Before they hit this.
Like the 4%, I just have to give that to my accountant and he does it all.
Does it? You could probably talk to Airbnb about adding that as a levy because it's the same thing and it's common now.
I'll get my lawyer to do it.
Because all the municipalities, because they're trying to get theirs too, right? They're trying to get tourism revenue and take advantage of that. Notwithstanding that there is no like levy for long-term rentals or 6-month rentals or student rentals. I mean, we're talking about short-term rentals. I mean, student ones are probably the first one. Right? I just want to rent for 8 months or 4 months for terms for school.
There's a guy that bought one just by the hospital. And yeah, he was debating doing student rentals or long-term rental or Airbnb. And you can guess which one I lean towards that makes more money.
Yeah. But especially near the hospital, because you'd probably get a lot of visiting nurses or doctors doing, fellowships or secondments or what's that one? I hear it quite a bit for doctors where they just come in for 2 or 3 weeks to provide relief for doctors going on vacation.
Yeah.
Locums.
They pull up in their Porsche and their Tesla.
Yeah. Just do a 3-week locum, right? Visit another province, work, and travel on the weekends. I could see a doctor from, Toronto doing a locum in Banff or Calgary for a few weeks and staying at, again, the Airbnb.
What issues have you ran into with short-term rentals and complaints that you've received?
So most of the complaints I've received around short-term rentals, as I mentioned, more relate to compliance and misunderstanding about what they can actually do with it. So, what we brought up from the beginning was this is a secondary suite versus short-term rental, and yes, they can treat it as a short-term rental, but they still need to get the building inspector to come in to make sure that they're compliant with the secondary suite. The bigger issues that I see overall tends to be this patchwork regulatory framework, because every municipality is different, right? And every municipality has their own bylaw regarding short-term rentals. And so you can get just because you live in Red Deer, and then the surrounding community, buy one in Black Falls or Sylvan Lake, Penhold, Innisfail, and they can all be different. And the regulations that you have to do for compliance can all be different. And so when I look at this from a kind of into the future, what do I see? I see the provincial government coming out with their own regulation, like they do always when it comes to this, and saying, here's your standard.
It's like the Innkeeper Act for Airbnb.
Yes, exactly. And so you mentioned the Innkeeper Act. So the Innkeeper Act applies to individual rooms, right? So if you're renting out individual rooms. And so it could apply to Airbnb in relation to the contract that you're signing.
Because the Innkeeper Act is the best. 24-hour notice, peace.
Yeah, right? But again, it's like there's old legislation dealing with like the Woodsman's Lien Act, dealing with putting logs down the river, and when does ownership change for them and stuff like that. So the Innkeeper, again, we're talking about legislation that's eons old, but that's a great point. I can see them changing the Innkeeper Act, doing a major overhaul, and making it like the Short-Term Rental Act.
That'd be cool.
But the Innkeeper Act applies to hotels.
Yes.
Right? But it does apply to boarding houses or rooming houses.
The lodge downtown, how it got converted into fully furnished rentals.
Yeah.
So it's not Airbnb, it's not a hotel, it's kind of an in-between. But apparently, because they have all these different services that a hotel offers, they have so many rights to kick out tenants because they fall under the Innkeeper Act. So I've heard.
that'd be interesting, because again, because there are different rules, right? But then, for example, under Innkeepers Act, you have to do different building requirements to meet a standard. So, for example, you can't put issues, for example, with hot plates, right? So, unless you're a certified secondary suite, it's actually against building code to have a hot plate in the basement.
Oh, a hot plate? I thought it was just 220 wiring.
So if you say, because again, it's just the risk of fire.
Oh, crazy.
From someone just plugging their hot plate into the wall.
That seems better than yeah. I can't have a 220 wiring, but I can have an air fryer.
Yeah. Well, again, it's the type of enclosed device and how it's built. But I've seen fires from hot plates, and insurance gets voided. And so I think about short-term rentals. The risk that people have is that because it churns so much more, it gives a greater possibility of a negative event happening.
Right. Yeah, bad character.
And you don't necessarily know the person who's coming in. You might never even meet them at all.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Right? They poke in the code, they get in and
send me their money.
And send you their money, exactly, right? Whereas, again, with a long-term rental, you have the option of knowing the person. They can be there for 5 or 6 years. They can, you have that. You can build up a relationship with them so you know what they're about. And so there's a degree of stability that goes with that.
Sure. But also less risk, less reward.
Yes. Yeah. The entrepreneurial spirit, right?
So Airbnb arbitrage. Hot topic. Airbnb arbitrage is I'm going to long-term rent a place, and then I'm going to short-term rent it out to someone else and make the difference. I'm going to make a profit. So I just helped someone in Sylvan Lake do an Airbnb arbitrage by encouraging them. I didn't do any of the paperwork. And so they bought they leased it for 2 years, and it came fully furnished. That's crazy. And now they're Airbnb-ing it out in Sylvan Lake during the summer. Gonna make a killing. $500 a night. They pay $2,500.
So is a sub rental, like a sublease?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Can you see any problems with that?
Oh, absolutely. And I was just thinking, I swore I've read regulations that specifically are prohibiting, that type of opportunity. Certainly as the landlord, like in a lease, we've written restrictions that say, and pretty much every lease that I've drafted, residential, consumer, doesn't matter, commercial or consumer, no subleases without landlord's consent. and the fact that you're having that arbitrage opportunity, I would be arguing that you're putting new tenants in there.
Sure.
And then I would be going after the tenant for any increase in value, so like an accounting of the profit that they've made.
Yeah.
And then I'd probably kick them out and Airbnb it myself. It would probably be this
World's most expensive management.
Exactly, right? Yeah. So I don't thank you very much for your time. One was, why would you get a property management company to do your Airbnb versus doing it yourself? Like, you mentioned kind of just the 25-30% cost associated with that, but what's the benefit for that cost?
So my mother-in-law actually does Airbnb management here in Red Deer and Sylvan Lake, and the benefit is we've had people from BC buy legally suited houses here in Red Deer, basement suite, upstairs suite, and Airbnb, both of them. They bought it just from a virtual tour. They're in BC, their property just went up $800,000, they're buying a $330,000 legally suited property here, fully furnishing it, and Airbnb-ing it. So what my mother-in-law does is she'll set it up and she'll have it on. So we actually had it on within 30 days. So before the first mortgage payment, we already had 3 bookings. So you hire someone who's a white glove service and you're paying them what they're worth, but now instead of making $1,500 on long-term rent, you're making $2,800 on Airbnb. And so why would you hire someone to do it? Because I don't want to do it.
So the same thing why you hire a realtor or a lawyer, time versus money.
Yeah, well, and professionals making money. Like,
Yeah.
I could not do your job. I would not want to do your job if I could do your job, but I can't do your job.
I mean, I got a realtor, right? They drafted the agreement. Why? Because as you said, I did not want to, right? All right, thank you so much again. So this is our podcast for Justice Outside the Box. Stay tuned for further videos on a variety of topics that we put forward.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Bryce.